Hi, this is David Davis, and in this demo, I'll show you how to restore connectivity to an ESX host after management network access was lost. This is from my new VMware vSphere Troubleshooting video training course. So here's the console of that ESXi server. Now we have a couple options to try to restore network connectivity here. First off, let's try the DCUI method. I'll press F2 and log in as root. We can go down here and we can test the management network. And as you can see, that test failed. I'll press enter. And of course, we could try something like restarting the management network, which would go out there and try to obtain a new DHCP lease if we were using DHCP, but you're probably not doing that on a production ESXi server. We could disable and re-enable the management network. We could go in here and we could check the network configuration. That would actually be a smart thing to do. And before I even go into the IP configuration here, I noticed that I can't access the network adapters up there. Those are grayed out. That's because the distributed virtual switch is in use on this ESXi server. So if we go back one level here, we can see at least we have an IP address. One of the things we could do is go down here and we could restore the standard switch. This is actually a really useful script that goes out there. It creates a new vSwitch. It takes one of the physical adapters, one of the VM NICs, and it puts that VM NIC that's required to be up and running in that new vSwitch. It creates a new management network port group and a new VMK interface and puts it in that management network port group. If you've messed up the distributed virtual switch configuration like we have, it's one of the best surefire ways to get you back up and running as quickly as possible. Now, before we use that option, let's go and check out what's going on with these virtual switches from the command line. I've already enabled tech support mode, so I'm going to hold down Alt and press F1. I'll go ahead and log in as root. And then we can type ESXCFG vSwitch -L. So just from looking at this, things look pretty good. However, we don't know if those two uplinks are working. We can do an ESXCFG NICs -L, and we can see we have three uplinks there, with two of them, VMNIC 1 and 2, being the uplinks on the DV switch. So from that output, we can see that all three NICs are up and running, and the two NICs that are the uplinks on the DV switch, VMNIC 1 and 2, both show to be up as well. So things look pretty good. However, for some reason, those NICs aren't providing us the connectivity we need. Now, we could go to the physical switch where those NICs are connected and start doing some more troubleshooting from there, or we could just go back and move the VMK0 interface back over onto the standard virtual switch that has the functioning uplink that it was on before. On the other hand, we could just use the direct console user interface and see if that gets us up even quicker. Let's do an Alt F2, and let's choose to restore the standard switch. It says, are you sure you want to move the management network onto a standard switch? Just press F11, which is OK. And let's see what happens. It'll take just a second here. Notice the Restore Standard Switch option is now grayed out. Let's go into Configure Management Network. We now have network adapters here, VMNIC 1 and 2. If we go into those, we can see we now have access to configure the physical NICs here and to select what they're connected to. I can press D to get more details on each one. Notice that VMNIC 0 is connected to vSwitch 0, and VMNIC 1 is connected but not used by anything, and the same status for VMNIC 2. So now let's go to the console with Alt F1. I'll press up arrow here a couple times, and let's look and see what the output of ESXconfig vSwitch -L is. So now we still have our vSwitch 0 with VMNIC 0 on it. That hasn't changed. But what was created was a new vSwitch, vSwitch 1, with VMNIC 1 and 2 on it. Notice the new management network 1 that's underneath that, and it has one used port, which should be VMK1, actually a new VM kernel interface that was created. But I can tell you here, if we try to do a ping to our default gateway, no management traffic is still getting through. And that's because we both know that VMNIC 1 and 2 aren't fully functional. We need to get VMK0 or VMK1, whatever management interface we have, back onto some kind of switch that's connected to VMNIC 0. Now we could accomplish this by doing a series of ESXconfig vSwitch commands, but let's go back and let's give that DCUI a try one more time. I'll do an Alt F2. Now if we take a look at this screen in the DCUI, the network adapters screen, actually it's very helpful, but you have to know what you're doing. Notice it says to select the adapters for this host's default management network connection. You can use 2 or more adapters for fault tolerance and load balancing. So the X on the left-hand side next to the VMNIC actually tells ESXi which adapters the VMK interface is going to be connected to. This is important. So let's go ahead and use the space bar and we'll uncheck these and we'll put a check next to VMNIC 0 because we know that's the adapter we actually want. That's the adapter that was working and these other 2 adapters aren't. So with that X there, I'll press enter and then I'll press enter again. I'll press escape to exit out of the network management configuration. I'll have to say yes here to restart the management network. And now let's go to our console and see what's going on. Here on the console, I'll press up arrow once and go back to ESXconfig vSwitch -L. And let's take a look and see what happened. So first off, notice we have vSwitch 0 with no uplinks. Then we have vSwitch 1 and it has an uplink, VMNIC 0. VMNIC 0 is the NIC that we wanted to use. That's the physical uplink that was working. The DCUI has put that on the vSwitch that has the management network. So regardless of what vSwitches you had out there, it knows that it put the VMK interface that it created in the management network port group on vSwitch 1, so that's why it added VMNIC 0 to vSwitch 1. So this should have resolved our management network connectivity. In fact, if we ping our default gateway, now we're getting a response. Our management interfaces are up. Now, the downside to this, if we do an ESXconfig vSwitch again, notice the VM network up there, the VM network port group under vSwitch 0. Now that port group has no uplinks. So we got our ESXi server back on the network, but our virtual machines connected to the VM network now have no connectivity. So we've done some good things and some bad things, but overall we're making progress because now we should be able to manage this ESXi server from vCenter. So with that, let's go over to vCenter. And there we go. Notice that the ESXi server is back here. It's not grayed out anymore. Notice that our Virtual Switch 0 is still here, and now Virtual Switch 1 is here. The management network VMK 0 is now on vSwitch 1, and it has a working physical adapter, VMNIC 0. So how are we going to get the VM network down here to vSwitch 1? I would just add a new virtual machine port group to vSwitch 1. So to do that, let's go to Properties. We'll click Add here. We'll add a new virtual machine connection type. We'll call it VM Network 2. Click Finish. And there we go. There's the new VM Network 2. Now there's one virtual machine, fortunately for us, in the virtual machine port group VM Network. All we need to do is to go to the tab for virtual machines, and then we could just right-click on each one of these, go down to Edit Settings, go to the network adapter, and change this to VM Network 2. Back to the network configuration, and there's the virtual machine down there on VM Network 2, and it should now have its network connectivity back to the physical network.
Thanks for watching. For more information regarding our training, please visit www.trainsignal.com.